It started in a small tech repair shop, tucked away on one of the busiest streets in Atlanta. The kind of shop you might walk past without a second thought. Dusty windows, an old neon open sign buzzing faintly in the corner. Inside, the counters were cluttered with wires, broken phones, cracked laptops, and old TVs that hadn't worked in years. The air smelled faintly of solder and burnt plastic, a smell Jamal Carter had come to associate with home. Jamal was just 17, but he had been working at the shop for almost 2 years now. His co-workers often joked that he had a magic touch when it came to fixing electronics. Phones that wouldn't turn on, tablets with shattered screens, even a few outdated gaming consoles. Jamal could bring them all back to life. His boss, Mr. Green, often said Jamal was the best repairman he'd ever hired, but he never said it where customers could hear. Jamal didn't mind. He wasn't doing it for the praise. To him, it was about the challenge. Every broken gadget was like a puzzle, and solving puzzles was something Jamal had been good at for as long as he could remember. But the customers didn't see that. To them, Jamal was just another kid behind the counter. Some didn't even bother to make eye contact. They'd slap their broken gadgets on the counter and mumble instructions like, "Just fix it," or, "I need this by tomorrow," before walking away. To most people, he was invisible. Just another teenager trying to scrape together a few bucks. They didn't see the spark of curiosity in his eyes when he picked up a broken device, or the way his hands moved with careful precision as he worked. They didn't see the brilliance in his mind, a brilliance that even Jamal himself was only beginning to understand. But today was no ordinary day. The shop was quiet, except for the faint hum of an old ceiling fan and the occasional beep from Jamal's workstation. He was repairing a cracked tablet screen when the door swung open with a sharp jingle of the bell. Jamal looked up to see a man in a sharp gray suit standing in the doorway. He was tall, with a tense expression, as if he was in a hurry. In one hand, he held a sleek, battered briefcase. The man didn't bother with pleasantries. "You the repair guy?" he asked briskly. Jamal nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, I'm the guy. What do you need fixed?" The man placed the briefcase on the counter with a loud thud. Up close, it was clear that this wasn't an ordinary briefcase. It was made of some kind of high-tech material that Jamal couldn't quite identify, sleek, dark, and slightly scuffed, as if it had been through a lot. "Can you fix it or not, kid?" the man snapped, his tone sharp. "Time is money." Before Jamal could respond, the man turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. Jamal frowned, looking down at the briefcase. "Well, that's new," he muttered to himself. He ran his fingers over the surface of the case, his curiosity already piqued. This wasn't the kind of thing people usually brought into the shop. Phones, laptops, old radios, sure. But a briefcase? As he examined it, something caught his eye. Engraved in the corner of the case were 2 small initials, EM. The initials gleamed faintly under the flickering fluorescent light. Jamal didn't recognize them, but something about the briefcase felt important. He tried to shake the feeling. It was just another job, he told himself. Just another puzzle to solve. Still, he couldn't help but wonder about the man who had dropped it off. Who was he? Why was he in such a hurry? And what could possibly be so urgent about fixing a briefcase? Jamal placed the case on his workstation and carefully unlatched it. Inside, he found a sleek digital interface. The screen was cracked, and the circuits underneath looked like they'd been fried. Jamal's brow furrowed as he examined the damage. This was no ordinary device. The inner workings of the briefcase were unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The circuits were intricately designed, far more advanced than the typical gadgets he worked on. There was something almost futuristic about it, as if the technology had come straight out of a sci-fi movie. Jamal grabbed his tools and got to work. He started by carefully removing the damaged components, his hands moving with practiced precision. As he worked, he noticed something strange. The briefcase wasn't just damaged, it looked like someone had deliberately tampered with it. Why would anyone mess with this? Jamal muttered under his breath. The more he examined the briefcase, the more questions he had. There were hidden compartments, encrypted files, and what appeared to be a small but powerful battery pack. None of it made sense. Jamal glanced at the initials again. "EM. Who are you?" he wondered aloud. The shop bell jingled again, but this time, it wasn't the man in the suit. It was Mrs. Thompson, one of the shop's regular customers. She placed an old clock radio on the counter and smiled warmly at Jamal. "Afternoon, Jamal," she said. "Think you can fix this old thing for me?" Jamal forced a smile, his mind still on the briefcase. "Sure thing, Mrs. Thompson. It'll be ready by tomorrow." As she left, Jamal's focus returned to the mysterious device in front of him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this briefcase was different. It wasn't just another broken gadget. It was something bigger. And for the first time in his life, Jamal felt like he was on the edge of something extraordinary. Jamal had seen all kinds of electronics in his time at the repair shop. But this briefcase? It was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. The craftsmanship, the complexity of the circuits, it was on another level. It was the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a government lab or on the desk of some billionaire inventor. The cracked screen on the interface flickered weakly as Jamal powered it up. Strange lines of code scrolled across the display, faster than he could follow. The system seemed to be trying to reboot, but the damage was too severe. "All right, let's see what you're hiding," Jamal said to himself, pulling a magnifying glass closer to get a better look at the inner components. He carefully traced the wiring, making notes in his head. Whoever designed this didn't just throw it together, it was planned with precision. He found a damaged chip near the center and removed it carefully, making sure not to disturb the surrounding circuitry. It looked custom-made, not something you could just buy in a store. Jamal leaned back for a moment, thinking. If the man in the suit was in such a rush, this thing must be important. But what could it possibly be? And why bring it here, to a small repair shop in Atlanta, when it was clearly worth a fortune? As he pondered these questions, the door to the back room creaked open. "Jamal." Mr. Green's voice boomed, startling him. Jamal turned to see his boss, a gruff man in his late 50s, with a coffee stain on his shirt and a permanent scowl on his face. "What's taking so long?" "Mrs. Thompson's radio isn't going to fix itself, you know." "I'll get to it," Jamal replied quickly, instinctively shielding the briefcase from view. He didn't know why, but something told him to keep it under wraps. Mr. Green frowned, eyeing the sleek device on Jamal's desk. "What's that?" "Just another repair," Jamal said, keeping his tone casual. "Nothing special." Mr. Green snorted. "Well, don't spend all day on it. We've got paying customers, kid." Jamal nodded, waiting for his boss to leave before turning back to the briefcase. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a strange connection to the device. It was as if it was challenging him, daring him to uncover its secrets. Hours passed as Jamal worked tirelessly, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. He replaced the damaged chip, repaired the wiring, and even managed to patch up the cracked screen. By the time he was done, the briefcase looked almost as good as new. But the real test was whether it would work. Jamal pressed the power button and held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the screen came to life. Lines of code scrolled across the display again, but this time, they seemed more organized. A faint blue glow illuminated the edges of the briefcase, and the interface began to stabilize. "Whoa," Jamal muttered, leaning closer. The screen displayed a series of encrypted files, each marked with a strange symbol Jamal didn't recognize. One file, however, stood out from the rest. It was labeled simply, Project Genesis. Jamal hesitated. He knew he probably shouldn't open it. For all he knew, this could be classified government data or some top-secret corporate project. But curiosity got the better of him. With a few clicks, the file began to load. What appeared on the screen made Jamal's jaw drop. It wasn't just technical schematics or boring spreadsheets. It was a blueprint and advanced design for some kind of energy system. The plans showed a device capable of harnessing and storing energy in a way Jamal had never seen before. This is crazy," he whispered, his eyes scanning the intricate diagrams. The possibilities raced through his mind. If this technology worked, it could change everything: power cities, replace fossil fuels, maybe even eliminate energy shortages entirely. But why was it hidden in a briefcase? And why did the man in the suit leave it with him? Before Jamal could think any further, the screen flickered. A warning message appeared in bold red letters. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating lockdown. Panic surged through Jamal as the briefcase beeped loudly, its screen flashing red. He tried to shut it down, but the system wouldn't respond. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the beeping stopped. The screen went dark, and the briefcase powered down. Jamal sat back, his heart racing. What the heck just happened? The bell above the shop door jingled again, making him jump. He turned to see a different man walking in. This one wasn't wearing a suit, he was dressed casually, but there was something intimidating about him. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Jamal. "You Jamal Carter?" the man asked, his voice low and serious. Yeah," Jamal replied cautiously. The man walked closer, his gaze shifting to the briefcase on Jamal's desk. "I need you to hand that over. Now." Jamal's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet stayed rooted to the floor. "Who are you? And why do you want this?" "That's classified," the man said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Just give me the case, kid. You don't know what you're messing with." Jamal's mind raced. Should he hand it over? Something told him this wasn't just about a repair anymore. Whatever was in that briefcase was important enough for strangers to come looking for it. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Jamal said carefully. "But I can't give it to you. The guy who dropped it off didn't say anything about." "I don't care what he said," the man interrupted, his voice rising. "That case doesn't belong to you. Now, hand it over before I call the authorities." Jamal's hands clenched into fists. He didn't like being threatened, but he also didn't want to get in over his head. "Fine," he said reluctantly, reaching for the briefcase. But just as he was about to hand it over, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the shop, leaving Jamal more confused than ever. For the next hour, Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the briefcase. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who were these people? Why was this briefcase so important? And what was Project Genesis? One thing was certain: this was no ordinary repair job. And whatever Jamal had gotten himself into, there was no turning back now. Curiosity had always been Jamal's strongest trait, and this time, it wasn't letting him rest. The briefcase wasn't just a gadget, it was a masterpiece of engineering, something far beyond the broken phones, tablets, and laptops he was used to fixing. It felt alive, humming softly as if it were waiting for him to unlock its secrets. As Jamal dove into the device, the screen came back to life, flashing blueprints, codes, and encrypted files. He didn't understand half of it, but there was something mesmerizing about the algorithms. They had a rhythm, a structure that seemed almost musical in their complexity. Jamal's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he explored file after file, each more intricate than the last. The name Project Genesis appeared again and again, stamped across several folders. But what was it? The schematics hinted at something revolutionary, an energy system that could change the way the world worked. Jamal wasn't entirely sure what he was looking at, but one thing was clear: this briefcase wasn't just valuable, it was priceless. The hours flew by as Jamal worked. He was so absorbed in the task that he didn't even notice when the sun began to rise. The quiet hum of the briefcase, the faint glow of the screen, and the challenge of decoding the encrypted files kept him glued to his desk. He felt alive, sharper than he had in months, maybe years. But not everyone was impressed. At school, Jamal's classmates had noticed his exhaustion. He'd shown up late, dark circles under his eyes, barely paying attention to his teachers. During lunch, he sat by himself, scribbling notes in a small notebook he'd started carrying around. "What's up with him?" one boy whispered to his friend, loud enough for Jamal to hear. "He's probably working on some nerd project," another replied, smirking. "Hey, Jamal. Building another robot? Or is it a rocket ship this time?" Jamal ignored them, his mind elsewhere. But that didn't stop the taunts. "Why even bother, man?" one of them said, leaning closer. "No one's gonna care about your little experiments. You're just wasting your time." Jamal clenched his jaw but said nothing. He was used to being teased. It had been that way for years, ever since he'd first shown an interest in electronics. Most of the kids in his neighborhood didn't understand his passion. To them, he was just the weird kid who spent more time fixing gadgets than playing basketball or hanging out at the mall. Even his boss, Mr. Green, wasn't on his side. "Jamal," Mr. Green said one afternoon, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time on that briefcase." Jamal looked up from his workstation, where the briefcase lay open, its complex circuitry exposed. "Yeah, I'm making progress." It's something big, Mr. Green." "I think it's more than just a regular repair job." Mr. Green raised an eyebrow. "Big? Kid, you're working in a repair shop, not a tech lab. People come here for quick fixes, not, whatever that is. Stick to simple stuff if you want to keep your job, all right?" Jamal nodded reluctantly, but his mind was already racing. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a responsibility to figure out what the briefcase was. Something about it called to him, like it had been dropped into his life for a reason. Still, the pressure was mounting. Between school, work, and the relentless teasing from his peers, Jamal was starting to feel the weight of it all. One night, as he sat at his desk with the briefcase in front of him, his mom knocked on his bedroom door. "Jamal," she said softly, peeking inside. He quickly closed the briefcase, hiding it under a pile of papers. "Yeah, Mom." She stepped in, her eyes filled with concern. "You've been up late every night this week. Is everything okay?" Jamal hesitated. He wanted to tell her about the briefcase, about the incredible discovery he was making. But he knew she wouldn't understand. She worked long hours at the hospital and worried constantly about him staying out of trouble. The last thing she needed was more stress. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a school project." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "All right. Just don't overdo it, okay? You need your rest." "Yeah. I will." As soon as she closed the door, Jamal pulled the briefcase back out. He couldn't stop now. The more he uncovered, the more questions he had. But it wasn't just curiosity driving him anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt like purpose. Things took a darker turn the next day. As Jamal walked home from school, he noticed a black car parked across the street from the repair shop. It wasn't the kind of car you usually saw in his neighborhood, sleek, expensive, with tinted windows that hid whoever was inside. Jamal's stomach tightened. Was it the man in the suit? Or maybe the other guy who had come looking for the briefcase? He ducked into an alley, watching from a distance as the car idled. Minutes passed, but no one got out. Finally, the car pulled away, disappearing down the street. Jamal shook his head, trying to push the thought aside. He was probably just being paranoid. But when he stepped into the shop, Mr. Green was waiting for him, his expression unusually serious. "Jamal," he said, folding his arms. "We need to talk." Jamal froze. "About what?" "That briefcase," Mr. Green said, nodding toward the counter where it sat. "Some guy came in earlier asking about it. Said he'd pay good money if I handed it over." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. What did you tell him?" Mr. Green frowned. "I told him we don't sell other people's stuff." "But he didn't look happy about it." "Who's this guy, Jamal? What's going on?" "I don't know," Jamal said quickly. "It's just a repair job." "Doesn't seem like just a repair job to me," Mr. Green said. "Look, kid, I don't want any trouble in my shop. If this thing is causing problems, you need to get rid of it. Understand?" Jamal nodded, but inside, he was panicking. Whoever was looking for the briefcase wasn't going to stop. And now they knew where to find him. That night, Jamal stayed up even later than usual, poring over the files in the briefcase. He needed answers. He needed to know why this device was so important and why people were willing to go to such lengths to get it back. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made him jump. By the time the clock struck midnight, Jamal had uncovered something that made his blood run cold. The files contained not only blueprints for the energy system but also detailed notes about its potential uses. Some were incredible clean energy, sustainable cities, limitless power. But others were far more sinister. There were mentions of weaponization, surveillance, and control. If this technology fell into the wrong hands, it could do more harm than good. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He was in over his head. But no matter how scared he felt, he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't walk away now. The weight of what Jamal had uncovered pressed on his chest like a heavy stone. This wasn't just about fixing a fancy briefcase anymore. The files inside weren't just codes and schematics, they were pieces of something much larger, something that could reshape the world for better or worse. He stared at the screen, the words Project Genesis flashing back at him. Who had created this? And why had it ended up in his hands? Jamal knew he should probably turn the briefcase over to someone, maybe the authorities, maybe the man who had left it. But every instinct told him not to. The people chasing this technology didn't seem like the kind who'd use it responsibly. And deep down, he felt like he'd been entrusted with it for a reason. Still, it was hard to think clearly when the world seemed to be closing in on him. The next day at school, Jamal's exhaustion was impossible to hide. He stumbled into class, his head foggy, his body aching from another sleepless night. "Yo, Jamal," one of the boys in the back called out as he walked to his seat. "You look like a zombie. What's wrong? Too much time playing with your little science experiments." The classroom erupted in laughter. Jamal gritted his teeth, refusing to respond. "Leave him alone," a girl near the front muttered, but her voice was barely audible over the snickering. "Why?" "He doesn't care," another boy shot back. "All he ever does is sit there, acting like he's smarter than everyone else." Jamal kept his head down, his fists clenched under the desk. It wasn't worth arguing. He'd learned a long time ago that standing up for himself only made things worse. But the comments lingered, cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. By lunchtime, Jamal had had enough. He found an empty spot under the bleachers behind the school and sat down with his notebook, flipping through the pages filled with notes and sketches. The briefcase occupied his every thought now. He couldn't focus on anything else, not school, not work, not even the relentless teasing. But as he stared at the pages, he started to notice something. The algorithms, the blueprints, even the encrypted files, they all seemed incomplete, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Jamal had no idea how to solve it, but he was starting to see patterns, connections he hadn't noticed before. "Hey, nerd," a voice called out, snapping him out of his thoughts. Jamal looked up to see three boys standing a few feet away, their arms crossed. The leader, Marcus, was smirking, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "What are you doing back here?" Marcus asked, stepping closer. "Hiding from the real world again." "Just leave me alone," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady. Marcus laughed. "Or what? You gonna hit me with a calculator?" The other boys chuckled, and Jamal felt his face heat up. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Before he could react, Marcus reached out and grabbed the notebook from his hands. "What's this?" Marcus said, flipping through the pages. "Whoa, look at all these little drawings. You trying to invent something, Einstein?" Jamal jumped to his feet. "Give it back." Marcus held the notebook over his head, grinning. "Make me." The other boys cheered him on as Jamal tried to grab it, but Marcus was taller, stronger, and quicker. All right," Marcus said after a minute, tossing the notebook to one of his friends. "Let's see what the genius is working on." The second boy opened the notebook, his brow furrowing as he scanned the pages. "What is this? Some kind of code?" Marcus snatched it back, squinting at the notes. "Nah, it's probably just a bunch of nonsense. He's always messing with stuff no one cares about." Jamal clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He could feel the anger bubbling inside him, threatening to explode. But he forced himself to stay calm. "Give it back," he said again, his voice low. Marcus laughed. "Fine, whatever. Here." He tossed the notebook onto the ground, where it landed in a puddle. Jamal bent down to pick it up, his hands shaking. "Have fun with your little projects, Jamal," Marcus said as he walked away. "But don't forget you'll always just be the weird kid no one cares about." That night, Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the water-stained pages of his notebook. He felt defeated, exhausted, and alone. The taunts from his classmates echoed in his mind, mixing with Mr. Green's warnings and the mysterious black car outside the shop. What was he even doing? Why was he putting himself through all this? For a moment, he thought about giving up, about putting the briefcase back together, dropping it off at the shop, and walking away. Maybe Mr. Green was right. Maybe this wasn't his problem to solve. But then he remembered the files. The blueprints. The potential of the technology inside the briefcase. If he walked away now, who would take over? What if the wrong people got their hands on it? Jamal took a deep breath, pushing his doubts aside. He couldn't give up. Not now. He spent the next few hours carefully redrawing the sketches that had been ruined, his mind racing as he pieced the puzzle together. The patterns were becoming clearer, the connections more obvious. He still didn't understand everything, but he was getting closer. As the clock struck midnight, Jamal leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He was exhausted, but he couldn't stop now. He picked up the briefcase, running his fingers over the smooth surface. The initials E.M gleamed faintly in the dim light, a constant reminder of the man who had dropped it off. Who was he? And why had he been in such a hurry? Jamal didn't have the answers yet, but he was determined to find them. The next morning, Jamal woke to the sound of knocking on his bedroom window. He sat up, his heart pounding. It was still dark outside, the faint glow of the streetlights casting eerie shadows across his room. Slowly, he got out of bed and peered through the curtains. A man stood outside, his face hidden by the brim of a baseball cap. He was pointing at Jamal, motioning for him to come outside. Jamal's blood ran cold. He stepped back from the window, his mind racing. Who was this guy? What did he want? The man knocked again, louder this time. Jamal Carter, the man said, his voice muffled by the glass. I know you have it. We need to talk. Jamal's heart felt like it might burst out of his chest. He didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed the briefcase, shoved it into his backpack, and bolted for the door. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't stay here. Here's the expanded Rising Action and Small Revelations section with a focus on keeping the narrative engaging and suspenseful while using simple English vocabulary. Over the next few days, Jamal's life became a blur of research, late nights, and endless curiosity. The briefcase sat on his workbench like a puzzle waiting to be solved, its secrets calling to him. At first, he had no idea where to start. The technology was unlike anything he had ever seen, more advanced, more complex, almost alien in its precision. But Jamal wasn't one to give up easily. He spent hours poring over the files, trying to understand how the pieces fit together. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. The circuits, the codes, the encrypted data, they weren't random. They were part of something bigger, something extraordinary. It didn't take long for Jamal to realize that this wasn't just another gadget or experimental device. The briefcase held the core of an advanced AI system, one that had the potential to change everything. The AI, as Jamal discovered, wasn't like the voice assistants or chatbots people used on their phones. This was something far more sophisticated. The files referred to it as EN, short for Enhanced Operational Neural Network. EN wasn't just designed to assist, it was designed to think, adapt, and learn at an unparalleled speed. Its applications were limitless. It could transform industries, solve problems humans had struggled with for decades, and even predict outcomes with astonishing accuracy. Jamal couldn't help but marvel at the brilliance behind it. Whoever had created EN wasn't just a genius, they were a visionary. But as Jamal dug deeper, he found something else, a flaw. At first, it was just a tiny detail buried in the code, something so small it was easy to overlook. But the more he studied it, the more he realized how dangerous it was. The flaw wasn't just a minor bug, it was a ticking time bomb. If left unfixed, it could cause EN to malfunction in ways that could be catastrophic. Systems could crash. Lives could be put at risk. And if the technology fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be unimaginable. Jamal sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. The flaw was clear now, like a crack in the foundation of a skyscraper. He knew he couldn't ignore it. But what could he do? He wasn't some big-shot engineer or scientist. He was just a kid from Atlanta with a talent for fixing gadgets. Who would listen to him? For a moment, Jamal considered staying silent. After all, it wasn't his problem. The man who had dropped off the briefcase would come back eventually, and then it would be out of his hands. But the thought nagged at him. What if the man didn't come back? What if the technology was sold, stolen, or used without the flaw being fixed? Could he live with himself knowing he had the chance to prevent something terrible and chose to do nothing? Jamal took a deep breath. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing, he had to try. Jamal started by examining the briefcase itself. The initials E.M were his only clue. At first, he had no idea what they meant. But as he researched the files and the technology, something clicked. The designs were too advanced, too unique. They reminded him of the work of someone he had read about in tech magazines and online forums, a billionaire inventor known for his groundbreaking innovations. Elon Musk, Jamal whispered to himself, the realization hitting him like a lightning bolt. It made sense. Musk was one of the few people in the world who had the resources and vision to create something like Ian. And the initials on the briefcase? They were a perfect match. But if the briefcase belonged to Elon Musk, why was it sitting in Jamal's tiny repair shop? And why had the man who dropped it off been in such a hurry? The questions swirled in Jamal's mind, but he didn't have time to dwell on them. He needed to find a way to contact Musk and tell him about the flaw. Jamal's first thought was to send an email. He spent an hour drafting a message, carefully explaining what he had found and why it was important. But as he stared at the screen, doubt crept in. Would Musk even read his email? And if he did, would he believe it? Jamal deleted the draft and tried another approach. He found a phone number for Musk's company and called, but the automated system quickly redirected him to a voicemail box. "Hi, my name is Jamal Carter," he said nervously. "I think I found something important in a prototype that might belong to Mr. Musk. It's about a flaw in the design, and it could be dangerous if..." The line cut off before he could finish. Jamal groaned in frustration. As the days passed, Jamal's frustration grew. No matter what he tried, he couldn't reach Musk. And the more he thought about the flaw, the more urgent it felt. He stayed up late every night, studying the code, running simulations, and searching for answers. He knew he was in over his head, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to fix this. At the same time, strange things started happening. Jamal noticed unfamiliar cars parked near his house. His phone would occasionally glitch, and once, he thought he saw someone watching him through the window of the repair shop. Am I being paranoid? He wondered aloud. But deep down, he knew he wasn't imagining things. Someone else knew about the briefcase. One evening, as Jamal was reviewing the files again, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: a line of encrypted text buried deep in the code. It took him hours to decode it, but when he finally did, his heart raced. The message was simple but chilling. Trust no one. Fix the flaw. E.M. Jamal stared at the screen, his mind racing. The message confirmed what he had suspected: Elon Musk knew about the flaw. But why hadn't he fixed it? And why had he left the briefcase with Jamal? The words "trust no one" echoed in his mind. Whoever was watching him, whoever wanted the briefcase, they couldn't be trusted. Jamal knew he was running out of time. Determined to make progress, Jamal focused on the flaw. He experimented with different solutions, testing and retesting his ideas. Slowly but surely, he began to make headway. The breakthrough came late one night. Jamal had been working for hours, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, when he finally found the answer. It was a simple adjustment to the code, one that patched the vulnerability without compromising the system's functionality. Jamal leaned back in his chair, a sense of triumph washing over him. He had done it. He had fixed the flaw. But his victory was short-lived. As Jamal celebrated his success, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, and the words sent a chill down his spine. "We know what you've done. Hand over the briefcase, or face the consequences." Jamal's hands trembled as he read the message. Whoever these people were, they weren't bluffing. He glanced at the briefcase, now more valuable than ever. He had fixed the flaw, but at what cost? Jamal realized he wasn't just in the middle of a technical challenge anymore, he was in the middle of a dangerous game. And the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Here's the continuation, expanding the narrative of rising action and small revelations to gradually escalate the tension and suspense toward the 5,000-word target. Jamal stared at his phone, his mind racing. Who were these people? How did they know about the briefcase? Questions swirled in his head, but there were no clear answers. The shop felt eerily quiet now, every shadow seeming darker, every sound sharper. For the first time, Jamal felt real fear. He wasn't just tinkering with some broken device anymore, he was holding something people were willing to fight for. He grabbed the briefcase and stuffed it into his backpack. His instincts told him it wasn't safe to leave it in the shop anymore. If these people knew what he had done, it was only a matter of time before they came for it. Jamal hurried home, his heart pounding with every step. He double-checked the locks on his door and pulled the blinds shut. But even in the safety of his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The next morning, Jamal woke to find another message on his phone. You have 48 hours. After that, there will be no warnings. The words were cold and final. Jamal didn't need a second reminder. He knew he had to act fast. He spent the entire day working on a plan. He had already fixed the flaw in the code, but that wasn't enough. He needed to find a way to return the briefcase to Elon Musk. If anyone could protect it from falling into the wrong hands, it was Musk himself. Jamal tried reaching out to Musk's company again, but every attempt was met with silence. Frustrated, he turned to the internet. He searched forums, tech blogs, and social media, looking for any clue that might lead him closer to the billionaire inventor. Late that night, Jamal found what he was looking for, a post on a private tech forum. It was written by someone claiming to work for Musk's team, and it included a contact email for urgent matters only. Jamal didn't waste a second. He typed out a message, explaining everything he had discovered about the briefcase and the danger surrounding it. He hesitated before hitting send. What if this was a trap? What if the people threatening him had planted the email as bait? But Jamal didn't have time to second-guess himself. He pressed send and hoped for the best. The next morning, Jamal received a reply. The email was brief but reassuring. Message received. Keep the briefcase safe. Someone will contact you soon. Jamal felt a wave of relief. For the first time in days, he wasn't completely alone. Someone out there knew what was going on and was willing to help. But his relief was short-lived. That afternoon, Jamal noticed a black SUV parked across the street from his house. It had tinted windows, and the engine idled quietly, as if waiting. Jamal's stomach turned. He knew the SUV wasn't a coincidence. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and preparation. Jamal couldn't leave the house without feeling like he was being followed. The black SUV appeared in different places outside the shop, near his school, even at the park where he sometimes went to clear his head. Jamal knew he couldn't outrun these people forever. They were professionals, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But Jamal wasn't about to give up. He started carrying the briefcase with him everywhere he went, keeping it hidden under his hoodie or in his backpack. He also began encrypting the files he had accessed, creating backups on secure drives in case the original data was destroyed. One evening, just as Jamal was about to call it a night, his phone rang. The number was unlisted. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Is this Jamal Carter?" The voice on the other end was calm and professional, but there was an urgency to it. "Who's asking?" Jamal replied, his guard up. "My name is Rebecca Hayes. I work for Elon Musk. We received your message, and we need to meet immediately." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. Was this real? Or was it another trap? "How do I know you're legit?" he asked. There was a pause on the line, followed by a series of numbers. "That's the encryption key for the files you accessed. Only someone from our team would know it." Jamal checked the numbers against the files on his laptop. They matched. "Okay," he said finally. "Where do we meet?" Rebecca arranged to meet Jamal at a busy cafe downtown. It was a public place, full of people, safe, or at least safer than meeting in private. Jamal arrived early, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who might be watching him. A woman in her late 30s approached him. She had sharp features, a no-nonsense demeanor, and wore a blazer that screamed corporate. "Jamal?" she asked, her voice low. He nodded. Rebecca wasted no time. "We don't have long. Do you have the briefcase?" Jamal hesitated. He wanted to trust her, but his instincts told him to be cautious. "Show me some ID first," he said. Rebecca smirked, pulling out a badge with Musk's company logo. Satisfied? Jamal nodded and handed her the briefcase. As Rebecca examined the briefcase, Jamal noticed something strange. A man sitting at a nearby table was watching them intently. He wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, but his posture gave him away. "Rebecca," Jamal whispered. "We're being watched." Rebecca glanced over her shoulder, her expression hardening. "Stay calm," she said. "Do exactly as I say." She stood up, grabbing Jamal's arm. "We're leaving," she said firmly. The two of them exited the cafe, but the man followed. Jamal's heart pounded as they hurried down the street, weaving through the crowd. "This way," Rebecca said, pulling him into an alley. Just as they turned the corner, Jamal heard the sound of footsteps behind them. The man wasn't giving up. Rebecca pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "We need an extraction. Now," she said into the receiver. Moments later, a black sedan pulled up to the alley. "Get in," Rebecca ordered. Jamal didn't hesitate. He climbed into the car, clutching his backpack tightly. Rebecca followed, slamming the door behind her. The driver took off, leaving the man in the baseball cap far behind. As the car sped through the city, Jamal finally allowed himself to breathe. For now, they were safe. But he knew this was far from over. Jamal sat in a large, minimalistic conference room at SpaceX, his hands clutching the repaired briefcase. The air hummed with anticipation. Surrounding him were Elon Musk's top engineers and executives, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. At the head of the table was the man himself, Elon Musk, his piercing eyes fixed on Jamal. "All right, kid," Elon said, leaning forward. "You've gone through a lot to get here. Let's hear it." Jamal's palms were damp, but he wasn't about to back down now. Taking a deep breath, he stood up and opened the briefcase. "I found this in a state that looked like it wasn't meant to be fixed," he began, his voice steady despite the pressure. "But I couldn't walk away. There was something different about it. Something important." He pulled up the interface on the screen, displaying the repaired AI system. "I found a flaw in the design, a vulnerability that could cause catastrophic errors if the system was scaled up. It wasn't just a technical glitch. This could have destroyed satellites, disrupted entire communication networks, and maybe worse." The room fell silent. Elon's eyebrows furrowed as he stared at the screen. His top engineers leaned forward, exchanging murmurs and scrolling through the files Jamal had decrypted. One of them, a gray-haired man with glasses, spoke up. "These are proprietary algorithms. How on earth did you even access this level of detail? This code is encrypted with layers that even experienced coders can't crack without tools." "I didn't crack it," Jamal replied, his tone calm but firm. "I followed the patterns. I saw how it worked and it just made sense." A younger engineer scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're telling me a teenager solved something we've been struggling with for weeks? Come on. This has to be a setup." But Elon raised a hand, silencing her. He gestured for Jamal to continue. Jamal nodded and pointed to a specific part of the code. "Right here," he said, highlighting a segment. "This is where the system could have failed. It's subtle, but if the AI encounters too much data at once, it overloads. I rewrote this part to redistribute the load evenly across the network." The same skeptical engineer opened her laptop and ran a simulation of Jamal's adjustment. Within moments, her jaw dropped. "It works," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Elon leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice calm but charged with curiosity. "Not only did you repair this prototype, but you improved it in ways even we didn't anticipate." "Yes," Jamal said simply, his confidence growing. "And you're, what, 17? "Yes." A smile broke across Elon's face, part disbelief, part admiration. "This is incredible. Truly." But before Jamal could feel a sense of accomplishment, Elon's face grew serious. "You know what this means, right?" Jamal nodded. "It means someone out there knows about this, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get it." At that moment, Elon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. He slid the phone across the table, showing Jamal the message. "The boy has the case. If you don't want this to escalate, hand him over." Jamal's stomach sank. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're a rogue faction," Elon explained, his voice low. "A group that's been trying to sabotage our projects for years. If they get their hands on this technology, they won't use it for innovation. They'll use it for control." Jamal's hands tightened into fists. "Then we can't let them have it." Elon nodded. "Agreed." But this just became a lot more dangerous. The room was tense, everyone waiting for Elon to decide the next move. But to everyone's surprise, it was Jamal who spoke first. "We need to secure the system," he said, his voice firm. "Encrypt it so deeply that even if they get the physical briefcase, they won't be able to access what's inside." The engineers exchanged glances, impressed by Jamal's composure. "And then?" Elon asked, intrigued. Jamal hesitated for a moment before meeting Elon's gaze. "And then we use it as bait. We set a trap to catch them before they can hurt anyone else." Elon's smile returned, this time full of approval. "I like the way you think, kid," he said. "Let's make it happen." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Jamal worked alongside Elon's team, helping them re-encrypt the AI system and add decoy files to the briefcase. Every move was calculated to lure the rogue faction into a controlled environment where they could be apprehended. For the first time, Jamal felt like he truly belonged. The engineers treated him as an equal, seeking his input and listening to his ideas. Even Elon seemed impressed, occasionally glancing at Jamal with a look of genuine respect. The trap was set. The briefcase, now a decoy, was placed in a secure location monitored by SpaceX's security team. All they had to do was wait. Hours turned into a tense vigil as everyone watched the live feeds from the surveillance cameras. Jamal's heart raced every time he thought he saw movement. And then it happened. A group of masked figures appeared on the screen, moving with precision and speed. They bypassed the first few security measures with ease, but as they reached for the briefcase, the room filled with alarms. "Got them," one of the security officers said, activating the lockdown. Within moments, the intruders were surrounded by guards. They didn't stand a chance. When the dust settled, Elon turned to Jamal, a look of pride on his face. "You just helped us stop a major threat," he said. "I don't think we could have done it without you." Jamal couldn't help but smile. For the first time, he felt like all his hard work and late nights had truly paid off. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But I couldn't have done it without this chance." Elon placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You've got a gift, Jamal. And I think it's time the world sees it." As the meeting wrapped up, Elon handed Jamal a card. "This is my personal number," he said. "If you're ever looking for an opportunity, call me." Jamal stared at the card, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. As he left the SpaceX headquarters that night, Jamal felt a sense of accomplishment he'd never experienced before. He had gone from being an overlooked teenager in a small tech shop to someone who had earned the respect of one of the greatest innovators of the age. But more importantly, he had proven to himself that he was capable of greatness. Here's the continuation, expanding on Jamal's rising role, the aftermath, and deeper connections to Elon Musk's team and future endeavors. As Jamal left SpaceX headquarters, clutching the card Elon Musk had given him, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. He replayed every detail in his mind, the tense moments, the adrenaline-fueled planning, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. But something else lingered. The threat wasn't over. The rogue group had been caught, but the intentions behind their actions still worried him. Who were they working for? And why were they so desperate to sabotage Elon's prototype? Jamal barely slept that night. Instead, he pored over the files he'd worked on, still fascinated by the intricacy of the briefcase's technology. He had proven his capability, but now he was beginning to wonder what he could achieve if he had more time, resources, and guidance. The next morning, Jamal received an email from one of Elon's engineers. Subject: Follow-up and future prospects. Body: Hey Jamal. It was a pleasure working with you yesterday. We've been reviewing the adjustments you made to the prototype, and they're not just impressive, they're groundbreaking. We're curious if you'd like to continue working on this project. There's more to uncover, and we think you could help us take it to the next level. Let us know if you're interested. Best. Maya S. Senior Engineer, SpaceX. Jamal's heart raced as he read the email. Was this for real? A week later, Jamal found himself back at SpaceX, this time in a more formal setting. Maya, the engineer who had emailed him, introduced him to the rest of the team. Unlike the tense atmosphere of his first visit, this meeting was full of warmth and mutual respect. We've been running simulations based on your improvements, Maya said, gesturing to a large screen displaying a 3D model of the prototype. Your solution not only fixed the vulnerability, it optimized the entire system. We're now running 20% faster than before. Jamal's eyes widened. I didn't realize it would make that much of a difference. Elon, who had quietly entered the room, spoke up. That's the hallmark of true innovation, Jamal. Sometimes, you don't even see the full scope of your own genius. Jamal's cheeks burned with pride. As the weeks passed, Jamal became more involved with the SpaceX team. He balanced his work with his responsibilities back at home, often spending late nights on video calls with Maya and the other engineers. It wasn't long before Jamal uncovered another issue, a hidden vulnerability buried deep in the system. Unlike the first flaw, this one appeared to be intentional. Someone planted this, Jamal said during one of their meetings, his voice tinged with concern. This wasn't a mistake. The room fell silent. Elon leaned forward, his expression serious. Are you saying we've got a mole? Jamal nodded. It looks that way. Whoever it was, they knew exactly what they were doing. Elon's team launched an internal investigation, using Jamal's findings as a starting point. The discovery sent shockwaves through the company. Security protocols were tightened, and every employee's work was scrutinized. Despite the tension, Jamal remained focused. He continued to dive deeper into the system, determined to uncover the truth. After weeks of painstaking work, Jamal found a clue, a line of code tied to an employee ID. When he presented his findings, Elon's team acted quickly, identifying the mole as someone in the IT department who had been leaking information to the rogue faction. The mole's capture solidified Jamal's position as a trusted member of the team. Elon personally thanked him, saying, "You've done more for this company in a few months than some people do in a lifetime." But for Jamal, the real reward was the sense of belonging. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. As the months passed, Jamal's life changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. He was offered a paid internship at SpaceX, giving him access to resources and mentors that fueled his growth. Back in Atlanta, his classmates no longer mocked him. In fact, many of them sought his advice, inspired by his journey. But Jamal didn't let the attention get to his head. He stayed humble, remembering the challenges that had brought him to this point. One day, during a quiet moment in his office, Elon called Jamal in for a private conversation. "Jamal," Elon began, "you've shown incredible talent and resilience. But I can't help feeling like we're only scratching the surface of what you're capable of." Jamal tilted his head, curious. "I want to offer you something," Elon continued. "It's not just an internship, it's a scholarship to any university of your choice. We'll cover everything. All I ask is that you come back and work with us after you graduate." Jamal's eyes widened. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dead serious," Elon replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "What do you say?" Jamal accepted the offer, knowing it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He enrolled in a top engineering program, where he excelled beyond everyone's expectations. But even as he pursued his studies, Jamal remained connected to SpaceX, occasionally consulting on projects and staying in touch with Maya and the rest of the team. Years later, when he returned to SpaceX as a full-fledged engineer, he brought with him not only knowledge but also the confidence and determination that had driven him from the start. Jamal's journey became an inspiration to countless young people, proving that talent and hard work could overcome any obstacle. And as he stood on the stage at a SpaceX event, presenting a revolutionary new project he had designed, he looked out at the audience and smiled. Because he knew that this was only the beginning. The days following Jamal's incredible breakthrough felt surreal. He had always dreamed of something bigger, something more than just fixing phones and gadgets at a small repair shop. But nothing could have prepared him for the opportunity that Elon Musk was offering. It wasn't just a thank you. It wasn't just a job well done. Elon Musk, the visionary behind SpaceX, Tesla, and some of the world's most innovative companies, had offered Jamal a permanent spot on his team. Elon had not only seen the technical genius in Jamal but had also recognized the young man's potential for greatness beyond just repairing devices. This wasn't just about fixing flaws in a system anymore. Jamal's mind was sharp, his instincts were ahead of his time, and his passion for innovation was unstoppable. The offer came with a catch: Jamal had to leave his life in Atlanta behind. His old routine, his humble repair shop, and his familiar neighborhood would all seem like distant memories. But the chance to learn from Elon Musk personally was an opportunity most could only dream of. And Jamal wasn't about to let it slip away. Elon Musk had always been a figure larger than life in the world of technology, but when he extended his hand to Jamal, it was with the kind of sincerity that Jamal had never expected. "I'm glad you made it through, Jamal," Elon said one day as they sat in a meeting room at SpaceX. "I've seen a lot of talent over the years, but your ability to think outside the box is rare. The world needs more minds like yours." Jamal smiled modestly. "I'm just trying to do what I can, Mr. Musk." "No," Elon said, shaking his head. "You've done more than that. You've changed everything. You've made things better." Jamal felt the weight of Elon's words settle on him. The self-doubt that had once held him back seemed so distant now. There was no room for doubt anymore. He had proven himself not only to Elon, but to himself as well. Back in Atlanta, Jamal's life was changing in ways he hadn't imagined. His classmates, who once ridiculed him for his nerdy interests, now looked at him with awe. Social media buzzed with excitement as people learned about his incredible story. The same people who had once ignored Jamal's advice on electronics and dismissed his passion for technology were now congratulating him. "I always knew you had something special," one of his old classmates texted him. Others chimed in, asking for career advice or just to catch up. It was overwhelming at first. Jamal was still adjusting to the whirlwind of attention. But amidst the praise, one thing was clear: he hadn't let the recognition go to his head. Jamal had always been humble, and that had never changed. The customers who had once walked into his repair shop with no idea who Jamal was now called him for advice. They had seen his story on the news or heard about his breakthrough from others in the community. They were proud of him, just like his classmates, but they also appreciated that Jamal hadn't forgotten his roots. Despite the sudden fame and the life-changing offer from SpaceX, Jamal stayed grounded. He didn't forget the people who had helped him, the ones who had believed in him when no one else did. His family, his friends, and even the people from his old neighborhood, all of them had played a part in his success. Jamal could have chosen to leave his hometown behind completely, to dive into the luxury of working for one of the world's most famous companies. But instead, he found a way to combine both worlds. Using his newfound resources, Jamal began to focus on something that had always been close to his heart: helping others. He saw how many young people in his community had potential but lacked the means to nurture it. There were kids just like him, full of ideas but with nowhere to turn. Jamal started by opening a small tech workshop in his neighborhood, offering free mentorship to aspiring young inventors. The shop was a place where kids could come and learn about technology, coding, electronics, anything that sparked their imagination. He used his connections at SpaceX to bring in some of the world's top engineers to guest lecture or offer advice. He worked tirelessly, teaching coding, soldering, and software development. You don't need a fancy lab or big company to make something great, he'd tell them. All you need is a good idea, the will to make it happen, and the grit to push through when it gets tough. His reputation as a mentor grew, and so did the respect people had for him. Jamal wasn't just a tech genius, he was also a guide for the next generation. He opened doors for kids who had no idea what a future in tech could look like. Through Jamal's work, many of them went on to receive scholarships, internships, and even job offers from major tech companies. "Jamal's the reason I got into programming," said one of the young men he had mentored, now a junior developer at a startup. "He saw something in me before I even knew it was there." For Jamal, these successes were the greatest rewards. He didn't need fame or money, seeing others succeed because of his guidance was enough. Years passed, and Jamal's influence continued to grow. He wasn't just an engineer at SpaceX anymore. He had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hard work and determination. He had turned a small repair shop into an incubator for the next generation of tech leaders. The world started recognizing his contributions. But Jamal never lost sight of what really mattered. He didn't need accolades or trophies. The work he was doing for his community, the kids he was mentoring, the lives he was changing, that was his true legacy. One day, while speaking at a tech conference in front of a huge crowd, Jamal paused to reflect on everything that had brought him to that stage. He thought about the small repair shop, the briefcase, the late nights spent cracking codes, and the way Elon Musk had believed in him when no one else had. As he looked out over the crowd, he said, "I was once just a kid with a dream and a broken briefcase. But I learned that you don't need a perfect start to change the world. You just need to be willing to put in the work. And most importantly, you have to remember to give back, because that's how you make a real difference." Jamal's journey had come full circle. From a young man who was overlooked and underestimated to a global tech leader, he had never forgotten where he came from. His roots were still deep in the community that had raised him, and his drive to make the world a better place was stronger than ever. The briefcase that had once been a symbol of uncertainty had become a symbol of endless possibilities. And Jamal had not only found his own path but had paved the way for others to follow. Looking ahead, he knew there was more to accomplish, more to teach, and more lives to touch. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in his life, Jamal was excited to see where it would take him next. And he was ready to help others find their way, just as he had found his. As he sat in his office at SpaceX, staring out at the horizon, Jamal smiled. The future was bright, and it was his to shape. Jamal's story became one that people would tell for years. It wasn't just the story of a young man who fixed a broken briefcase or helped save a prototype. It was a story about courage, resilience, and the importance of believing in yourself even when no one else does. When Jamal looked back on everything that had happened, he couldn't help but marvel at the unexpected twists his life had taken. From the small repair shop in Atlanta to working with one of the most influential people in the tech world, Jamal's journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. But perhaps the most incredible part wasn't the achievements or the fame. It was the simple fact that he had dared to act when the world expected him to stay quiet. He remembered the nights he spent staring at the screen, studying the briefcase's blueprint, unsure of where it would lead. There were moments when the world seemed to tell him to give up. He could have easily decided that fixing gadgets was enough, that he didn't need to push any further. But deep inside, he knew there was something bigger waiting for him. He just had to be brave enough to find it. Years later, in a quiet room filled with reporters and cameras, Jamal reflected on everything he had learned. It was a moment that he'd never expected to come, but now that it had, he knew the message he wanted to share with the world. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of courage to change your life, he said softly, his eyes looking out over the crowd of eager faces. And if you're lucky, you might just change the world too. The room fell silent for a moment as his words sank in. It wasn't just an interview, it was a lesson, an invitation to take risks and believe in the power of possibility. People often looked for success in grand gestures or momentous events, but Jamal's story showed them that the true key to greatness was much simpler. It wasn't about having the right connections or even the best circumstances, it was about having the courage to take the first step, even when the path seemed unclear. Jamal's words didn't just inspire the crowd in that room, they reached thousands, even millions, of people who had once felt overlooked or underestimated. For every person who had ever been told that their dreams were too big or their ideas too small, Jamal was proof that anything was possible if you were willing to try. Looking back, Jamal realized that so much of his journey had been shaped by moments when others hadn't noticed him. He wasn't always the loudest in the room or the one who stood out. But that quiet strength, the kind that comes from knowing who you are, even when no one else sees it, was what had carried him through. At first, he had been just another kid working in a small tech repair shop, his skills and ideas overshadowed by the busy world around him. People had underestimated him. His classmates had teased him. His boss had told him to stick to the simple repairs. But Jamal had always believed that he was more than what others saw. He knew there was a spark inside of him waiting to be recognized. And it wasn't until the moment with the briefcase that the world began to see that spark. Elon Musk had seen something in Jamal that others had missed. He had recognized the brilliance that had been quietly building in the young man's mind for years. It was a reminder that sometimes, the people who are meant to change the world don't always look the way we expect. They don't always come with fancy degrees or impressive titles. They come from all walks of life, and often, they start from the most unexpected places. Jamal's story was a celebration of that truth. The world had doubted him, but he had never doubted himself. He had kept going, even when the road was tough. And in the end, it wasn't just his technical skills that mattered. It was his belief in the power of innovation, his willingness to take risks, and his commitment to help others rise along with him. After everything Jamal had achieved, he never forgot the importance of dreaming big. "I didn't get here by following someone else's path," he often said. "I carved my own way. And if I can do it, so can anyone else." This message resonated with people from all over the world. Jamal's journey showed them that success didn't depend on being born into the right family or having the best resources. It depended on the willingness to push past fear and doubt, to take risks even when it seemed impossible, and to never give up on a dream. To those who were still working in small shops, those who were still toiling away without recognition, Jamal had this to say: don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't do. The world is full of people who will doubt you. But your only job is to prove them wrong. That message struck a chord with millions. It gave them hope, even when everything seemed uncertain. Because Jamal had proven that greatness didn't always look the way people expected. It could start with something as simple as fixing a broken device. Over time, Jamal realized that his true impact was not just in the technology he helped create or the companies he worked for. His real impact lay in changing the way people saw themselves. He had shattered the stereotype that greatness could only come from a select few. He had shown that the most important qualities of success were not always about having the right connections or resources. It was about determination, passion, and the willingness to try. I want to be remembered for changing how people think, Jamal said once during a talk with young inventors. I want people to believe that they can create something, no matter where they come from or what they have. It's all about believing in your ability to make something out of nothing. Jamal didn't just want to be remembered as an inventor or a tech genius. He wanted to change the narrative for everyone who ever felt like they didn't belong in the world of innovation, technology, or big dreams. He wanted them to know that their ideas mattered too, that they had the power to change the world. As Jamal continued to grow in his career, his focus shifted to something larger than himself. He wanted to help build a future where anyone, regardless of their background, could pursue their passions and contribute to shaping the world. He worked on projects that supported underrepresented communities, making sure that people from all walks of life had access to the resources, education, and opportunities they needed to succeed. For Jamal, the future was not just about technology or innovation. It was about ensuring that the next generation had the chance to shine. He knew that the world was full of young dreamers who just needed someone to believe in them, just as Elon had believed in him. And so, as he looked to the horizon, Jamal saw not just a bright future for himself, but a bright future for everyone willing to take that first step, to dream big, and to make the impossible possible. The journey wasn't always easy, and there would be many challenges ahead. But Jamal knew one thing for sure: with the right mindset, anyone could change their own story and maybe even change the world too. Don't wait for someone else to tell you you're worth it, he said, looking out at the audience. You have the power. You have the courage. You just need to take that first step. And believe in yourself, because the world needs your brilliance. With that, Jamal's story continued to inspire, proving that sometimes, the quietest voices hold the greatest power.